Have you ever looked across a room at a grown adult, a person fully functioning in society, perhaps holding down a respectable job and paying taxes, and suddenly realized with a quiet, sinking feeling that you are actually looking at a 10-year-old boy? If you've ever noticed this, you know it rarely starts with something obvious. It doesn't usually look like a loud tantrum in the middle of a grocery store. It looks incredibly quiet. It looks like a forgotten chore that somehow becomes your responsibility again. It looks like an avoided conversation about the future. It looks like a blank, confused stare when a serious emotional decision needs to be made, followed by the subtle, unspoken expectation that someone else, usually you, will step in, take the reins, and fix the problem. It doesn't look like a big deal at first. You might even brush it off as a simple personality quirk, but it says more than you think. We often refer to this dynamic casually in society. We call it the man-child. We tend to joke about it in pop culture. We picture a guy playing video games until 4 in the morning, avoiding his adult responsibilities, relying on his partner to schedule his dentist appointments, buy gifts for his own mother, and remind him to take out the trash. We laugh it off as immaturity. We call it laziness. We label it as a harmless case of a man who just hasn't grown up yet. But if we look closer, if we strip away the sitcom humor and look at the actual neurological and behavioral patterns at play, we find something far more profound. We find that this isn't just a quirk of personality. It is a deeply ingrained, highly effective psychological defense mechanism. It is a specific way of moving through the world that requires the people around this person to constantly absorb the shock of reality so that they never have to. Before we dive into the hidden, often uncomfortable layers of why this happens, how it forms, and what it does to the people who find themselves trapped in its exhausting orbit, take a quiet moment right now to like this video and subscribe to the channel. Supporting our work allows us to keep exploring these unseen patterns of human behavior together, bringing clarity to the things we all feel but rarely know how to name. To truly understand this dynamic, we have to look past the major life events and focus entirely on the micro behaviors. People who operate in this survival mode often don't consciously realize they are doing it. It is entirely subconscious. It shows up in what psychologists and behavioral experts sometimes refer to as weaponized incompetence. But even that term can sound too aggressive for what is actually a very passive behavior. It is the subtle art of doing a task just poorly enough that someone else eventually takes over out of sheer frustration. It's saying things like, "You're just so much better at organizing the finances than I am," or "I didn't want to fold the laundry because I was afraid I'd do it wrong and upset you." On the surface, it sounds almost sweet. It sounds like a compliment or a harmless mistake made out of a desire to please. But beneath the surface, it is a highly evolved unconscious strategy. It is the complete abdication of cognitive labor. It forces the partner into the role of the project manager of the relationship. He might be willing to do the task, but only if he is given step-by-step instructions. He outsources the mental load, the remembering, the planning, the anticipating, onto someone else. He becomes an employee in his own life, waiting for a manager to tell him what to do. And then there's the avoidance of emotional friction. Life is inherently full of conflict. Relationships require difficult, uncomfortable conversations to survive and evolve. But when a difficult conversation arises with a man-child, you won't usually see a calm, structured adult disagreement. Instead, you see profound emotional deflection. You see the silent treatment. You see withdrawal. You see a man suddenly physically retreating to another room, shutting down, or sulking like a reprimanded adolescent. You might even see a sudden, dizzying shift where he becomes the victim of the scenario, forcing you to comfort him about the very thing he did to hurt you. You approach him because he broke a promise, and within 10 minutes, you find yourself apologizing for making him feel bad about breaking it. These behaviors are not random. They are deeply rooted in a person's early identity formation and their fundamental relationship with failure. Somewhere along the line, very early in life, this individual learned that staying small meant staying safe. We often assume that this behavior comes from neglect, but very frequently, it comes from the exact opposite. It comes from being over-coddled. Imagine a child raised by a highly anxious or highly controlling caregiver, a parent who never allowed the child to experience the natural consequences of their actions. If the child forgot their homework, the parent rushed to the school to deliver it. If the child had a conflict with a teacher, the parent fought the battle for them. While this looks like love, it is actually a subtle form of developmental theft. The parent steals the child's opportunity to build resilience. Friction, failure, and disappointment are the heavy weights we lift to build an adult identity. When those weights are constantly lifted by someone else, the psychological muscles atrophy. The subconscious mind draws a very specific conclusion. Stepping up is dangerous. The world is too overwhelming to handle alone, and someone will always come to rescue me. Alternatively, this pattern can also emerge from a harsh, hypercritical environment where taking responsibility only ever led to severe punishment or humiliation. If a child tries to wash the dishes and is screamed at for leaving a spot on a glass, the brain learns that initiative leads to pain. In either scenario, the overprotective, or the hypercritical, the ultimate survival strategy becomes the same. Do nothing. If you never fully claim your adulthood, you can never fail at it. It is a profound, paralyzing fear of inadequacy disguised as harmless incompetence. By refusing to grow up, they are protecting themselves from the crushing, terrifying weight of adult expectations. If you are the one living with this, or working alongside it, you probably feel a very specific, deeply isolating kind of exhaustion. It is a bone-deep fatigue that doesn't go away with a weekend of sleep or a vacation. That's because you are doing the emotional, physical, and cognitive labor for two entirely separate lives. You are carrying the invisible mental load. You are tracking the household schedules, anticipating the emotional moods, managing the inevitable crises, and constantly softening the blows of reality so that the environment remains stable. You become the shock absorber for someone else's life. If you have ever sat in your car in the driveway, feeling like you are slowly losing your mind, questioning if you are just asking for too much, wondering if you are too demanding, too rigid, or too sensitive, you aren't. Your exhaustion is completely valid. It is the natural, inevitable symptom of living in a one-sided reality. Your burnout is not a weakness in your character. It is a quiet, incredibly heavy burden you assumed, simply to keep the walls from caving in on both of you. And here's where we reach the turning point. Here's where the dynamic shifts from frustrating to psychologically fascinating. Most people look at this dynamic and assume the core issue is just a lack of drive. They think it is simply apathy. They believe that if they just explain things clearly enough, if they just communicate their needs better, if they create a better schedule or buy a shared calendar, the behavior will finally change. They treat it like a communication problem. But the real reason isn't what most people think. It's not about communication, and it's not about laziness. It is about control. I want you to pause the video for a second. I want you to think about a highly specific time in your life when you had to step in and clean up someone else's emotional, financial, or physical mess because they simply stood back, looked overwhelmed, and refused to handle it. I want you to go down to the comments right now and write about that specific moment. Writing it out is a powerful psychological action. It takes the invisible pattern out of your isolated mind and puts it out into the reality of the world. It forces you to look at the undeniable truth of what you have been carrying for so long. Go ahead and write it down. I read them, and others need to see that they are not alone in this experience. When we talk about control in relationships, we usually imagine the loud, aggressive, overt dominance we see in movies. We think of raised voices, strict rules, and financial abuse. But passive dependency is arguably one of the most powerful, insidious forms of control a human being can wield over another. By remaining helpless, the man-child dictates the entire emotional ecosystem of a relationship. The person who cares the least, or pretends to care the least, automatically controls the temperature of the room. He sets the bar of expectations so incredibly low that any bare minimum effort, like doing a single load of laundry or making one phone call, is celebrated as a massive, heroic victory. Meanwhile, the partner is forced, against their will, into the role of the manager, the parent, the designated responsible adult. And this is the most brilliant, entirely subconscious trap of the man-child dynamic, because he has forced his partner into the role of the exhausted, nagging parent. He gets to comfortably play the role of the rebellious, misunderstood teenager. When the partner finally breaks down from the sheer weight of carrying everything, when they ask for help or express anger and frustration, he can simply roll his eyes. He can call his partner a nag. He can tell them they need to relax, that they take life too seriously. He can effortlessly paint himself as the easygoing, fun-loving, laid-back guy who is constantly being smothered and criticized by a rigid, controlling, neurotic partner. It is a masterclass in psychological projection. He gets the safety, comfort, and security of being entirely taken care of, while simultaneously getting to feel morally superior to the person doing the heavy lifting. The partner literally becomes the villain of the story simply for asking him to participate in his own adult life. This dynamic completely and permanently shifts the nature of intimacy. You cannot maintain a romantic, passionate, equal partnership with someone you feel you are actively parenting. The human brain does not work that way. When you have to remind a grown man to clean up after himself, when you have to manage his emotional outbursts, the foundational respect quietly begins to erode. And where respect goes, intimacy inevitably follows. The spark dies entirely. It is replaced by a slow-burning, silent resentment. The partner eventually stops asking for help altogether, not because the problem is solved, not because they are happy, but because asking, explaining, and managing the inevitable pushback takes significantly more energy than just doing the tasks themselves. They enter a state of chronic emotional loneliness, the devastating experience of being in a room with someone, sharing a bed with someone, yet feeling completely and utterly alone, because there is no psychological equal present to share the load of existence. As we pull back the layers of this behavioral pattern, we see that it is ultimately a tragedy of unmet potential. The man-child is essentially trapped in a permanent waiting room of life, constantly hoping some external force, some new partner, or some sudden burst of motivation will come along and author life for him. He lives in a perpetual state of Someday he will figure it out. Someday he will take charge. But life doesn't work that way. Time does not pause because you refuse to engage with it. The longer you avoid the heavy weight of your own existence, the heavier and more terrifying it becomes. The world moves forward, and the gap between his biological age and his emotional age widens until it becomes a chasm that is almost impossible to bridge. The psychological safety they are trying so desperately to preserve by staying small ends up costing them the very relationships and security they depend on to survive. Because eventually, the caretakers burn out. Eventually, the partners carrying the load wake up one day and realize that their own lives are passing them by. They realize that they are not helping this person. They are just enabling a ghost to live comfortably inside the shell of an adult body. The partner leaves, not out of sudden anger, but out of absolute hollow exhaustion. Once you see this pattern clearly, you can't unsee it. You recognize the subtle deflections. You spot the weaponized incompetence from a mile away. You understand the sudden manipulative shifts into victimhood, designed specifically to avoid accountability. It isn't just a quirk of his personality. It isn't just a temporary phase of stress. It was never random. It was always a pattern. It was a perfectly designed system of survival that required you to sacrifice your peace for his comfort. And that deep awareness alone radically changes how you move forward in the world. You begin to fully realize on a cellular level that you cannot love someone into their adulthood. You cannot organize, schedule, or softly encourage someone into taking responsibility for their own soul. You cannot do the push-ups for them and expect them to get strong. They have to feel the harsh, unavoidable friction of reality. They have to be allowed to fail. They have to be allowed to fall down entirely on their own and figure out how to stand back up without your hand reaching out to pull them from the mud. If this deep dive explains something significant for you today, if it put words to a silent exhaustion you've been carrying for years, there's so much more to uncover. Understanding yourself, unpacking your own reactions, and recognizing the psychological blueprints of the people you allow into your personal space is the absolute beginning of everything. It is how you take your power back. Take a look at the video appearing on your screen right now. It explores the fascinating psychology of the over-functioner, the exact specific personality type that almost always falls into the trap of rescuing and enabling the man-child. Watching that video next will give you the complete, necessary picture of this complex dynamic and help you understand your own role in the cycle. Make sure you have officially subscribed to the channel and turned on notifications, because our very next video is going to explore a hidden emotional blind spot that will completely and permanently shift your perspective on how you subconsciously attach to others. You will not want to miss it. Thank you for being here. Thank you for your willingness to look deeper, and I will see you in the next one.